If I could actually pass the chair over to Councillor Ferguson, because I'd like to move the motion. Councillor Whitehead is on the floor.
I'm very supportive. I've been a huge supporter of ensuring that areas that have a deficit situation that we fill, and especially in code red areas, I think it is a priority, so the investment is important. But the report does beg one question, and I'm going to ask Michael this question because you're pulling from the Recreation Reserve. And when I read the report, it indicates it may create limitations to projects currently on the books. So can you help me understand what projects are impacted in regards to supporting this recommendation?
So through the chair, on page 3 of 11 of the staff report, it's identified that if committee approves $2.9 million from the Recreation Development Charge Reserve, the reserve balance will effectively be approximately $2 million. Right now, in our multi-year forecast, we have one project, the Dominic Agostino Riverdale Center, that will require approximately $2 million, and essentially that will leave the reserve fully committed. We collect approximately $2 million annually from development charge reserves. Having said that, there are some significant projects coming forward that will rely on that Recreation DC Reserve as part of the funding strategy, including the Winona Recreation Center, some Flamborough recreation projects. So again, the challenge we have in terms of reports such as the one before you is identifying funding sources. The alternative to the Recreation Development Charge Reserve is our unallocated capital reserve. Our unallocated capital reserve has a balance of approximately $12 million. The target for that reserve should be $24 million, so that is Council's approved target for our unallocated capital reserve is $24 million. The current balance is about $12 million. So if Council wished, they could revise the funding strategy, reduce the reliance on the Recreation DC Reserve, and commit the $2.9 million from the unallocated capital reserve. So, but again, there will be a number of future recreation projects that staff will bring forward to committee for direction as to the staging of those recreation projects. The reserve balance is the DC Reserve, Recreation Reserve balance, and the unallocated capital reserve balance are such that we will have to prioritize recreation projects, a number of recreation projects going forward. And again, I know Councillor Johnson wasn't in the room, and I made reference the Winona Recreation Center is currently forecast at an additional $19 million over and above the $2 million, and we will have to look at potential funding sources, including the Recreation DC Reserve for that project.
So, Mr. Chair, I certainly support the project. It was more about the financing, where it's coming from, and who it impacts. You've given us a couple options. One, we could utilize the capital unallocated dollars. I think you said there's about $12 million in that account. And that way you would preserve the development charges for the Winona and the Flamborough and the Riverdale project. Or we could do it the other way around, and when we get there, we could find strategic opportunities to ensure that those projects aren't delayed any longer than they need to be. So I think either way there's a solution. And for those reasons, I'm optimistic that we'll work with those ward councillors to ensure that their targeted projects are done in the timeframes that have been allotted, and we'll just have to find a creative solution to get there. So I will be supporting this today.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other speakers on the matter? Seeing on Councillor Park, you take the chair just for 1 second, because I just want to make one comment. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Rome. I see Robbins here also. This is, I think, 30% over budget, which is quite high. Architects generally have unit prices per square foot that they plug into these issues. What caused the big spike in price in this? Sure.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I just wanted to outline a few reasons that are also found on page 6 of the report. So some of the reasons can be characterized as housekeeping. So the 0.68 million of the civil tender, the cost that we're essentially fronting for the board, which through an agreement with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, they are repaying us for. Another item was a notionally approved item on a capital plan that has not yet come to fruition due to it being a 2017 commitment. So that's another housekeeping item. As far as the tender phase goes with a number of unforeseens, so 0.8 million was due to poor soil conditions. So when we discovered that relatively last minute, there was a little bit of redesign that was required. In this case, it was removal of the soil and specification to bring in suitable soil. It just happens to exist on that part of the property where we're constructing the rec center. It's not actually true for the board on the section that they're constructing the school. So good news for the board, unfortunately bad news for us. And as far as further overages, we did do a pre-tender cost estimate. This is coming in at 5% over. So we did experience some market conditions potentially that were the result. This was the result of market conditions. As well, we had looked at the construction contingency and the taxes. So all of that's included as well. On a project of this size, it's important to include that. Of course, it is the city's sole discretion. So as far as the construction contingency at 5%, it's not necessarily a commitment to the contractor. It's just something that we've done through industry practice. As well, we have escalation as a consideration. So between 2012 and 2016, we have to consider for the escalation of as well that occurred throughout that time, potentially up to 5%. So as you can see, we have a number of factors that we have detailed, and we wanted to bring that forward to GIC because obviously you do want to have this information, and it's an important process for the transparency of the award.
Okay, 30% is a big jump, Robin, as you can expect through you, Mr. Chairman. And I would hope that you did some sort of geotechnical work, or at least the architect did before he did the design, would have found the bad soil. I would hope that we built into our budget some escalation because I guess the 2017 capital budget, and I know that the project was actually approved, I believe, about 3 years ago. Well, first of all, how many bidders on the project? Did you get enough bidders to get a good cross-section?
Through the deputy mayor, there were 5 bidders that were pre-qualified to build a recreation center.
How many actually submitted bids of the 5 that were pre-qualified?
So we have procurement here, so I'll just turn it over to Tina Iacco.
Tina?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There were 5 pre-qualified bidders, and of the 5, we received 3 bids.
Okay. Is that a reasonable cross-section in your professional opinion? Reasonable test of the marketplace?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Usually when we do pre-qualifications, the qualified bidders don't like to see too many pre-qualified vendors on the list because then there's more competition. I think 5 was a healthy number, and the fact that we got 3 out of the 5 was fairly normal.
Why was it pre-qualified? Because it was so large? Because
of the complexity of the project, I believe, and because of the number of aspects of the project. There was a pool and a recreation center. It was a large project.
And typically when you go over budget of something of this magnitude, you would meet with the low bidder to help them value engineer where you could save money. Did you go through that exercise?
For this project, I believe that's going to be through the kickoff meeting. I think that facilities wanted to bring this to council for their consideration first before we entered into negotiations to give you that first right of refusal if you wish. But I think it's probably in our best interest that once we have the go-ahead to award the contract, that we certainly have those communications with the vendor.
And the successful bidder and the staff will know that we've already approved this, so where's the tension to try to get some value engineering done?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we did go through a value engineering exercise pre-tender. So that was one consideration going into this. Also, you have identified that it was a significant overage, and so in that case, what we're essentially looking at to bring those costs down, if that were the direction of council, would be a significant re-engineer. which would be a reduction in square footage. At this point in time, may not be giving us the value we hope, given that it would be an additional investment in redesign costs. So that isn't an option that we've identified for council. It is an option, but it's certainly not one that we recommend at this time. I also wanted to...
I'm not suggesting for a second that you're reducing the square footage of the building. What I'm suggesting is that the contractor put the price together. He wants the contract awarded to him. And they put the numbers together. They know where there's something that costs a lot of money that may not be necessary. That's typically the value engineering exercise you see on a major project. You bring the low bidder in before award and say, can you give us some help in how we can reduce cost and some of the design? Because they know what's expensive and they know what's built in their bid and they want the contract awarded to them, so they'll give you some help on that. But if you do it after you do the award today, there's no tension on it anymore. You agree with that?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
I just wonder if it isn't appropriate to, I don't want to hold the project up, but we are spending an extra 30% on this. It would be appropriate for direct staff at this time to go back and try to value engineer the project with the advice of the contractor who knows where savings can be made without impacting the end result, and then report back to us before we do the award. So that would be my suggestion, but I am the chair, so I'll take the chair back now, Councillor Farr, and open up for any other discussion.
Councillor Brenda Johnson.
Is there any other speakers? Councillor Brenda Johnson.
Hi, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. And I'm fully in support of this project. It's not to delay anything. But when I see unusually poor soil conditions, can we not access our race money like every other developer in the city?
Through the chair, first off, I'm not sure if the city as an agency qualifies, but again, it would just be a transfer of funds within the city. So effectively,
But it's another funding source, right?
Yeah, but effectively, it would still represent a city commitment. But again, we would have to ensure that the city as an agency would qualify under a RACE program. And again, I'm not sure if that's the case.
Okay, thank you. So that's one thing I was just asking, is that if you're looking at 30% over and we've got 0.8 million just to take care of the soil conditions, I know we have a wonderful RACE grant that has been underutilized for years. Is there any way that's a pocket of money and process? Could we not utilize that to alleviate some of the pressures off this project?
And through the chair, we can look at, I know there's a reserve for that, so we can look at that as a potential funding source.
It's huge. Okay, thank you.
Any other speakers? Seeing none, Councillor Green.
Certainly this is one of the legacy pieces of Pan Am and my predecessor, Mr. Bernie Morelli. My job is not to mess this up, and I certainly appreciate your support initially when you put this through. Looking for it now, and also want to recognize staff, Robin and Rome, who put this together, have been working through. This is a great report that I think offers the rationale for the overage, and it is an unfortunate feature, but something that we have been faced with, and certainly will be front of mind for me moving forward with other considerations. So I would ask that we just go ahead and move forward with this now and not dawdle, particularly because that community has been under construction now for what's going on 5 years. And so to put it, out another year or whatever it is just, I think, onerous on the community. We want to get it going and we want to coincide it with the school board. So one of those unique features that we have that I think as this unfolds, there'll be even more good news in the future about the type of catalyst this is going to be for our community. So I'm asking for your support and hope that we can get that here today.
Okay, are you moving the motion?
It is moved by myself, seconded